Well, hello, it's Scott Cuthbert, co-founder of Safeopedia, back with another episode of Safeonomics. We were recently at the Safety on the Edge conference, and Jamie and I did about 45 interviews. So we took a little breather from Safeonomics, but we're ready to get back at it. And today's episode, we're gonna talk to Pete Susca, I actually met at the Safety on the Edge conference. And today we're going to be talking about it's always bigger than safety and the relationship between organizational culture and unwanted outcomes. And Pete's got some amazing real world examples to share that I think are really going to be invaluable in learning how to blend safety and operations and talk the business talk the language of business. So without further ado, let's jump in to the interview.
Well, Scott, thank you. Thanks for having me on today. Yeah, my history in safety. I actually started in the fire service in 1980, got involved in a volunteer fire department at the same time I was going to college for physics, believe it or not. And my physics teacher said to me, Pete, you're about to graduate. I don't suggest you go into physics. So his son Pete was in safety, and he said, you've got this kind of practical scientific way of thinking. Why don't you go into something that's kind of practical scientific? And he said, safety seems to be that. Now, I'm not sure I went into safety because of that, but a lot of what I did in the fire service was safety. And in the 80s in the fire service, safety really evolved into what the fire service is today. And so as part of being in the fire service, I got involved with some folks that did training for the state and national fire academies, and ended up teaching hazmat training all across the United States, actually across the world, and ended up at Hamilton Standard, a manufacturing plant in Connecticut here that's part of United Technologies, and started doing some training there. And they said, geez, we have a job. Would you like to work here full time? I said, well, I've never really worked on the other side of the fence. So they said, yeah, you could, take this job as a safety professional because you certainly know what you're talking about. So I started doing that, and I learned kind of industrial safety. And then from there, got promoted into the corporate office of United Technologies. And then from there, I became a director of EH&S for Otis Elevator in Europe. And then evolved into, left UTC, ran some large consulting businesses, and then ultimately started my own consulting business. But along the way, I really, I had P&L responsibility. I ran quality functions, ran engineering functions. I ran admin functions in organizations. So I became a business person. And back when I started at UTC, Hamilton was trying to reach the Malcolm Baldrige Award. So they put us all through continuous improvement training and process improvement training. So I learned all of that. So all of this experience, fire service and process improvement, all of these, all this diversity of perspective is what gave me the perspective that I have today. And which really evolved this whole principle that we're going to talk about today, which is it's bigger than safety. Because every single safety situation I've ever stumbled across wasn't just about safety. It's never just about safety. And that's how I got into where we are today.
Yeah, and that's great background. And I just, we met at the Safety on the Edge conference, which is great conference, great speakers. And when you and I started chatting, it just clicked for me that, we had to have you on Safeonomics because of that, because of the, I think the diverse background that you have, the perspective of a firefighter, a safety professional, and a business person is really important, because I think we both acknowledged that the Safety on the Edge conference was great, but it was missing those operations people, because the safety folks are kind of preaching to the choir, and without that operational involvement or engagement, you're really missing out on a really big opportunity. So that's what you mentioned. You wrote 3 articles you've agreed to come on to Safeonomics, and we're gonna talk about all three articles. We're gonna just focus on the first one today, and then we'll have you back for part two and part three. But like you mentioned, it's always bigger than safety. The relationship between organizational culture and unwanted outcomes was the title of that first article.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you want to take a minute and kind of set that up for people
Sure.
before we dive into the questions.
Sure. This relationship, which ultimately became a diagram that I created 35 years ago. And it's, I've been in all of these things I've been talking about for 45 years. So it's been stewing and developing, and I've been practicing it and honing it. And basically, it's a connection between cause and effect, simplistically, right? So over on the cause side is we'll call it generically the culture of the organization, but I call it organizational operational factors. And simplistically, it's the organizational values and imperatives, the expectations of the organization and how those things are handled in the decision making of the organization from the top to the coal face. And so that is where risk and benefit get balanced. And one of the things I talk about all the time is that benefit always lives with risk. We in the safety profession are so risk focused, but we're not benefit focused. To us, benefit is less risk. No, there's real benefit out there that has nothing to do with risk. And we need to understand that, because when somebody, and I always tell people, when your folks get hurt at work, they're not coming to work to get hurt. They're actually trying to create something, some perceived benefit while they're getting hurt. And if you don't understand the benefit, then it's hard to understand where the risk is always going to come from. Okay. So you need to be an expert in benefit and risk, not just risk. And so when the organization makes decisions and those decisions aren't balanced well, risk and benefit, that imbalance starts to move downstream into the business unit, into the plant. And if the management system of the organization, in this case, safety management system, isn't robust enough to see into decision making and rebalance decision making before it moves downstream, then that imbalance moves into operational processes. Operational processes can be anything from hiring to purchasing to manufacturing to service. Generically speaking, process, the way we go about doing something of value. Okay. And when that process is imbalanced, it lives out in the plant with this great benefit and all of this risk associated with it. And you keep excessive risk out there long enough, it's ultimately going to create problems. If it's safety risk, near misses and events. If it's quality risk, it's nonconformities and quality escapes. It's the same process. So this organizational factors through management systems, which are the kind of the ozone layer of defense. If the management system is weak, it gets out into the process. It's an unbalanced process, creates risk. This excessive risk, living long enough, creates outcomes. And I tell everybody, everything follows that. Ethics, profitability, everything follows that path. Therefore, the reasons are the same for everything. We're just not getting far enough back outside of our little, silo look at cause to be able to see it's an organizational cause, not a safety cause or a quality cause. Okay. And so that's where that relationship all came from. And I mean, I live that relationship every day. I am out there in organizations poking up that relationship, moving, trying to understand where that all fits, what the attributes are. And the place that you're going to see that the easiest is in process health. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I'll give you an example. I'll give you a story that'll really frame this relationship. About 7 years ago, I was asked by a grain company, a company that buys and sells grain, to help them after they had two fatalities. They were concerned that they had much more fatality risk than they had fatalities. So I went in there and I told them, I said, like, I need to visit multiple operations, multiple sites, interview the executives, go all through the whole process. As I start to go to the sites, I start talking to these plant managers. Now, the sites basically, what they do is they buy and sell grain from the farmers. Their job is the interface between the farmers and whoever's buying the grain. And hundreds of miles away are these folks that are looking at Dow Jones futures, right? And they're looking at soybeans and grain and all these other things. And they're calling these plants saying, okay, it's time to buy grain X from the farmers, hold on to it for X amount of time, then we're going to mix it and we're going to sell it at this rate. And that's how they basically create a profit by, timing of the market and buying at a certain price and selling at a certain price. Well, inherent in that, there's two types of grain generically, a good quality grain and off-spec grain, right? And off-spec grain has a lot of particulate in it, it has a lot of moisture in it. So it becomes problematic if you hold that off-spec grain in a silo for too long. It either binds up, creates heat, and so you have fires, you have bound up mechanisms, all these things. So that's what basically was the creation of the reason why these two gentlemen who died went into this grain silo to try to get it working again because it got bound up and they died. Now, the company did its investigation causal analysis, basically determined that the fault of this incident was on these two workers who didn't follow the lockout tagout procedure energy control process to the T. And I said to them, I understand that perspective, but do you understand the way that you do business is creating these hazards? The right next to what you value the most, the profitability, is you creating fatality hazards day after day because you're keeping this grain that you value, that is low quality grain, in silos too long. And every single plant manager was complaining about the fact that these people don't understand my world and they don't understand the problems that I have with their decisions. But nobody at the top of the organization had safety in the accountability of that decision making. So they were creating fatality hazards every day, making profit. And when these two guys died, nobody ever pointed back to the people creating the hazard. And I said to them, look, I said, for the past 10, 15 years, these guys have been your heroes. They've been the plant heroes. And what I mean by that is when that silo goes down because of this whole situation, these two gentlemen would run in there and get the process running again. And because you were so focused on the benefit they created, and they didn't get hurt, that you said, well, they're safe and they're productive, they're heroes, and you patted them on the back. And then the day they died, they became zeros. All of a sudden, they were bad people. And I said, shame on you. Shame on you for not having a balanced way of looking at what was going on in your organization because you were putting these people at risk, but you weren't measuring the risk. You were just measuring the results, and you liked the results. And so that's how this whole relationship goes together, right? The organization makes its profit by doing this, and at the same time creates these fatality hazards in every single plant. Their management system wasn't strong enough, predictive enough to basically see that and reorganize the way the organization makes decisions or rebalances. And then because of that, these decisions get out to the plants. They create these bogged up and fire, bogged up scenarios with moving grain and fires and all those other things. And that has those fatality hazards living long enough created this risk of exposure. And ultimately, in this case, these guys died. And that's how it always works. Maybe not in that catastrophic fashion, but that's how all failure works.
Yeah.
So that's the story of the connection of cultured unwanted outcomes.
Yeah, and that's a powerful story and powerful way to set up the conversation today. And I forgot to mention at the beginning that we can provide a link and share the article. You mentioned that there's some charts and graphs and things in there that you've
Sure.
been working on for years. So,
Visuals.
yeah, some visuals. So so we'll definitely include a link to the article in the description here. for people who want to take a look at that. But yeah, I think that like what you're describing is probably too familiar to safety folks who are out there on the front lines. And a lot of the questions that we get, I think lead itself to to the first question for you is how can safety professionals shift leadership perception from viewing safety as a cost to seeing it as a core indicator of operational performance?
Yeah, that's a big question. And there's a lot to that. So let's kind of pull it apart a little bit. I see process in the way that I define process as kind of a wide spectrum. I see process as the nexus of operational benefit and risk. So if I'm walking through a plant or I'm walking through an operation or I'm looking at a service center or whatever it is, what I'm watching is where, and safety is such a great indicator of process health. I mean, I could take my wife into a plant that she knows nothing about, and I'll say, Mary, does this process look like it makes a good quality part? She won't know. I said, does this look like it looks like a profitable process? She won't know. Does this look safe? She'll have a perspective. She will have a perspective because we all do. We all do as humans. We all have a perspective of safety because safety is pretty visual and pretty granular and pretty, sensorial. And when you feel uncomfortable, you know what that's like, right? And so if I don't feel comfortable with the safety, I know there's bigger issues. So I leave safety at the door. I open the door to the process with safety, and then I leave safety behind, and I go in and look at the health of the process. And that is where I start to recognize what the organization creates. And that's where I think safety professionals need to be better at really kind of looking at the health of what the organization is doing, not just the results of it, the health of it, because the health of it is the predictor of the results. The health of it is the predictor of risk. Okay, if we don't set things up to be healthy, then they're going to be risky. And if they're going to be risky long enough, they're ultimately going to give us problems, right? So one of the things that I think safety professionals need to be able to do is learn their business from a perspective of how profit is created and loss is created. So, and loss typically is, cost or quality issues or things like that. And be able to understand their processes from a profit cost perspective. What does this process look like when it's profitable? What does this process look like when it's adding cost? The inefficiencies, the failures of the process, the quality nonconformities, all of those things that create cost, right? So, and that's different in every business. I'm not just talking about going and getting financial education. I'm trying to get business financial education, right? And we're going to talk in another session about how to upgrade your capacity as a safety professional. This kind of will just be the front end of that. The next thing is learn process improvement concepts. Well, learn like lean. Lean is a great set of concepts to kind of look at when you walk through a plant or when you ask a plant or you're talking to plant leaderships or you're sitting in a management meeting and you're listening to things. Okay. You're looking at data, you're saying, or transportation, excess transportation is one of the lean, lean waste, and I'll call them excesses, right? All of these things are excess, right? We're moving materials too much. We're moving materials unnecessarily. And I will tell you, for each of these risks or these wastes I'm going to talk about, I've done a fatality investigation, at least one fatality investigation for every single one of these things as a reason for the fatality. Okay, I went to a plant once where we were making pipe and they were storing pipe up so high because they couldn't ship it. For some reason, the shipping process was constricted. So they didn't want to stop manufacturing. So they over manufactured, right? So they started creating more and more inventory. Well, the inventory started to block people's ability to see the crane, right? So now you're blocking somebody's ability to see the crane. Guy walks out, crane hits somebody. Okay. So now when you have excess inventory, you have excess not only exposure, but you're defeating controls at the same time because you're changing the dynamic of the plant. So inventory is the next one. We're making more or holding on to more than we usually do, right? That's a risk, not just a profitability. It's a risk across many fronts. Excess motion. You've seen the spaghetti diagram kind of thing where we're looking at the motion and the efficiency of a person or a process, right? And the longer the spaghetti, the more motion, the more maybe non-value added time, right? Well, non-value added time and hazard exposure and are hand in glove, right? So every time we cause someone to go back to a process, redo something, be inefficient, we're causing more exposure, direct exposure. Okay, so exposure and inefficiency are one and the same. Excess exposure, right? Idle time, delays in processes, overproduction, but we're producing more than it's needed, over processing. I see this a lot. I call it, rework is in this category. I'll tell you a story. I got stories. I'm working for this company that's making uh, um, timber construction, right? So they're doing, I don't know if you've ever seen timber construction, big beams. They're CNC made in a plant. They're shipped out to the job site. They put them together like a Lego thing, right? And they connect them with wooden dowels. There's no screws, nails, nothing. Okay, beautiful stuff, right? So much so that all you have to do is kind of stain it on the inside, and you're done. Well, I'm watching these guys work and I'm doing a little safety analysis. And I said, well, how often do you have to work on ladders? And they said, well, most of our work is off of scissors lift, but we do sand on ladders. I said, sand? Why do you have to sand? He said, well, we get the wood dirty, when it comes to the job site, and then we step on it when we put it up. And then when we have to hit these pegs with a hammer, sometimes we have to align the wood, so we whack on it, we put dents in it. I said, isn't the wood sanded before it comes to the job site? Like sanded, like finished sanded? Yeah. And you're resanding it? Yeah. And you're doing it at height? Yeah. And how long does it take to resand? They said sometimes 1 day to 5 days for a crew of 5 people. I said, holy smokes, right? I mean, that's a lot of cost. That's a lot of scheduled time. That's a lot of safety risk, right? Time at height, right? See, this to me, this is a nexus of opportunity, right? I said, do you like the sand? He said, nobody likes the sand. I said, do you enjoy getting things dirty and clean? No. I said, well, let's not do that. Let's figure out a way to keep this stuff as clean as it came from the plant. Let's shrink down our non-value added work, our rework, and let's cut out work at height. Let's cut out excess time. Let's cut out excess costs. Let's cut out people that are pissed off. I'm like, this is a win-win-win-win-win, right? That's what I look for. And then I sell it. I market it as a business improvement, and safety comes along for the ride. There's no cost of safety here. I'm saving them money. And I'm saving them risk at the same time. That's the sweet spot. Okay. So all of these lean situations, these lean excesses, lean waste are opportunities to see excess cost. Okay. Selling cost first and safety second. Now, I've seen a lot of safety folks do it the other way, where we're trying to sell a safety feature and then we're trying to say, okay, well, it's going to help with business this way. I don't do that. I sell business first because I sell business to business people and they want to hear business. So I speak business to business people, and then I make sure safety comes along for a ride and the improved process and the cost of the ROI. It's not an excess safety cost. We're not spending money on safety. And nobody says no to that. Nobody in their right mind. So the question is, how do you present that? So you got to learn how to look at process. You got to learn how to talk process. The next thing is you got to establish cross-functional relationships with people. So you got to get close to the quality people. You got to get close to the finance people. You got to understand, and I'll talk about how to do that in the next session. But Sometimes it's just going in their office and looking at the walls and looking at what their hobbies are and then finding a connection and establishing a personal relationship with somebody before you establish a business relationship with them. And then you start to create a little momentum about them talking about their issues, you talking about yours, and then we try to figure out a way to solve our issues together. Okay, teaming, right? Because a lot of organizations aren't really teamed. There are a bunch of people working separately that come together and meet, and then they go work separately. um, the next step is seeing the nexus of waste, right? Okay, you get waste when this happens, and you get waste when this happens, and I get excess risk when this happens, and they all happen together here. So now let's talk the same language up, right? Let's get us all together and talk value, business value up the same way to the management team. So it's not just a safety person going in selling safety, it's quality, safety, and finance all saying, we need to fix this process for these reasons, and here's the benefit we're going to get out of that. Okay, so it's a cross-functional business approach, not a functional business approach. And then learning what it takes to make a good financial decision in your company. You know, what's a payback period that's acceptable? Is it a year or less, whatever it is? Because it becomes a no-brainer when it falls into that payback period that makes sense to the financial folks. So learn what that is. Learn what it takes to make a business case, how to present a business case, again, a cross-functional business case in your organization. And then make a business case that's hard to pass up.
Yeah.
Those are the steps. Okay. Now look, I do that from the outside. I'm not saying it's easy. Okay. But it's easier than selling cost all day long. I don't sell cost. I don't sell the legitimacy of spending money on safety. I sell value. I sell business value, and connected to that business value is safety value. And I recommend that's the way we do this as safety professionals. We need to be business professionals, not just safety professionals. So that's the point.
Yeah, I think previous guests have said similar things about like meet with the operations folks, understand what their challenges are, take the controller out for lunch and ask about what that ROI looks like, what their goals and objectives are for this year, and really
I see a lot of safety professionals, even I will say higher up ones that aren't invited to business meetings, or all the business meetings are not looked at in the same light as some of the other business people. And if that's the case, you got to ask why. And we're going to get to that in a little bit, but you need to be part of the business decision-making process, not that, break glass when there's a safety issue kind of person. You know what I mean?
when you were talking about ROI, just a question around like the examples that you gave were really operational focused. So it was
Yep.
improving the operational efficiency of the organization
Mhm.
and therefore generating an ROI. Sometimes, some of the questions we get with safety people are trying to bring in like a new program or new technology. There is an ROI there, but it requires an initial investment up front
Hmm.
before you're going to see that
Yeah.
ROI. Is that the same to you, or is
Yeah,
that
it's that
different?
investment that you make and the payback period that's acceptable. So if a company is going to invest, it's going to say, okay, look, you want me to invest $500,000? Fine. What's the payback? When do I break even on that $500,000 invest? You need to understand that, right? So when do we burn that off, and when do we start making profit on that? And then how much profit or how much less cost in turn profit am I making year after year, right? That's what a financial person is going to look at. And the cost of the money and all those other things come into play, but that's the basic principle. Yeah, I think we need to start seeing business from a business perspective, not just a safety. Safety is just an indicator of us now doing business well. Let's do business better. Okay. And look, all of us, most of us safety people are sitting in businesses. We're not sitting in a safety manufacturer. We don't manufacture safety. We're manufacturing or providing service or something else. Understand that. first, okay? Because you're adding value to that. You're not just adding safety value, or you're adding business value. And what I tell people all the time is, a safety solution that's not good for business is not good for safety either. It will dissolve. It will dissolve by the people in the shop. It will dissolve by new management coming in. It will dissolve. It will go away if it doesn't make good sense. I don't care how much money you spent on it. It will not sustain itself. So find something that makes good operational sense for the folks working. Hey, I can do this. This is simple. This is easier. This is straightforward. This makes sense and makes business sense at the same time. Because that when everything goes up and down in a business will likely to stay in more likely to stay in place. And that's what you're looking for, something that's sustainable.
And I'll have to dig it out for the next episode, but there was the professor from Australia at Safety on the Edge who said, you're looking at it all wrong. Safety is not a department. It's a process.
Yeah, it's a layer, as part of I call it like the thread in a quilt. It's not a patch, right? It's part of the thread. But the problem is, and you're going to get to it in some other questions, is that not all organizations see it that way. I mean, we go to these conferences, and the people that talk at these conferences are in the top, I don't know, 5% of companies in the world. When I talk to the average safety professional, their problem is not safety, it's organizational. Their challenge is an organizational challenge. Like, we're going to get to it. My boss doesn't listen to me. People don't look at me as, how many times I get in an elevator with a bunch of, my fellow executives, and they'll say, "Oh, here comes the safety guy. Be careful." Like, come on. I don't, when the financial guy comes in, I'll say, "Well, everybody check your wallets." Come on. But we have that kind of, we're put in that box, and we got to get out of that box. We got to get on the mainland, get off the island.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So in your experience, what are some early signs that safety failures are actually signals of deeper organizational health issues?
Yeah. I'm not going to say this is an equation between a sign and a reason, but it's along the path, right? So we're following a path. We're following indicators, right? And you got to know how to follow indicators. Because if you don't follow indicators, you follow harm or you follow risk. You follow something downstream from indicators, right? Because the indicators are the precursors of where the risk is getting created or changed, which ultimately is where the problem is going to be. So we have to change our lens on how we kind of look at the dynamic of the environment. I mean, instead of just looking at safety risk, we got to look at the dynamic, right? So here's some things that, I'll give you the flavor of that. I'm looking for obvious safety risks and nonconformities where they become a normalization of deviance. And what I mean by that is I'm walking through a plant and I see product stored in a walking aisle. Okay. And then on top of that, I see people walking by it like it's not even there or like it's normal. Okay. So wherever you see something that's visually, clearly, commonly known as wrong and no one's doing anything about it, that is a sign, symptom of organizational dysfunctionality. Okay. Now, can I go, okay, this whole organization is dysfunctional? No, I've got to go find other evidence. I got to walk it up. I got to go kind of make a case, right? But when you see stuff like that, that's telling you that the organization isn't disciplined. I'm going to call it operational discipline, a lack of operational discipline, your ability to hold right and wrong, clearly separate them, right? Now we're living in gray. And if you live in gray long enough, gray becomes right. Okay. The other thing is what I'll call color blindness. Everybody's got their floor painted yellow or the spot painted red, or they got the red tape or the yellow tape. Okay. Go look for the consistency of that. Consistency of color usage. And what I mean by that is if everything's stored supposed to be in yellow, or nothing is supposed to be in yellow, or nothing is supposed to be in red, see if that's consistent. If there's an inconsistency around how colors are used, that's about the basic, that's about as basic as you can get. That's like everybody driving, not really agreeing on green, red, and yellow on the light, you know? Okay, yellow maybe, but green and red, I mean, when green and red start to become, opinions, if you drove in Italy, that's what it's like. When they become opinions, that's a problem. That's a problem. I was brought to a plant to help with safety. This plant makes a product that's very fine. And and as we were driving into the plant, and this product is dark colored, right? As we're driving into the plant up the road, I'm looking at the grass around the plant. It's all black. I'm looking at the buildings, they're black. And I said to the guys that I was with from the company, I said, this product, is it a low cost commodity? They said, no, actually, it's very valuable. I said, well, why do you paint the whole plant with it? Why do you paint everything with something that's supposed to be so valuable? Why are you wasting all of this stuff? And it was just like obvious to me, but wasn't obvious to them because this is the way the plant always looked. And I said, this is not right. I mean, it would be like gold plating a gold mine, right? I'm like, you would do that, right? Right? I mean, this doesn't make sense. So, you're looking for sense in what you're seeing. That's the other thing. I'm looking for sense. Does this make sense to me? Right? And that kind of thing, seeing that, and when I started to get into the plant, realizing they had a hard time containing right and wrong. They had a hard time understanding what clean looked like. Really, their definition of clean was way offline. So you could see how that morphs into other line crossing. Okay. And there was a lot of line crossing in that plant where we just basically a reactionary plant trying to keep things running and meet the numbers and stay out of trouble. And I do see plants operating that way. Reactivity in organizations. A lot of organizations are reactive today. I mean, I do a lot of sessions with leadership teams and down to first line supervisors. And I'll ask them, if I had a gauge, I'll draw a gauge on a flip chart and say, are you mostly reactive or mostly proactive? And most people will say they're mostly reactive. They spend a lot of their time chasing and solving problems. Matter of fact, in this class I was in recently, I just left the class, and before me, another consultant was in there teaching them problem solving skills. I'm like, why don't you teach them problem preventing skills? Like, problem solving, and so, we get used to problems, and actually people kind of like problems because they get patted on the back when they solve problems. So we get into this dynamic of solving problems and not being able to step out of it. And I teach organizations how to kind of get out of problem solving, which is balanced problem solving. So yeah, reactionary problem solving is another indicator of is it's an unstable organization. You're constantly chasing things around, and what it's like juggling, right? If you're juggling seven balls, how the heck do you juggle seven balls? And most people can't juggle more than two. And these guys are saying, I juggle seven balls. You're not juggling seven. You're juggling the one that's on fire. You're juggling the one that's on fire. And the other six are rolling around on the ground, waiting to catch on fire. And when they catch on fire, you drop this one, you pick up another one. And that's how they manage. And everybody will say yeah to that. No matter what country you're in or what business you're in, they'll say, yep, that's my job. And I'll say, well, those six balls are at risk and they're the next fire. They're the next fire. Yeah. One of those balls is the next fire. So not only are you putting fires out, you're creating fires. You're an arsonist. I'll talk about organizational purpose conflicts. I was in the elevator business for a while. When I worked in Europe, I was reported to a senior vice president of Otis Elevator. And I sat in the office next to the guy who was the business development guy. Business development in the elevator business was buying elevator portfolios. And what I mean by that is you're buying a portfolio of elevators to service. Okay. And the best elevators to service were the worst elevators for safety. I mean, they had no pit switches, they had no car doors. I mean, they were horrendous, but we saw that as money opportunity, right? We could sell new stuff to them. Well, meanwhile, our people have to go work on it, and it's as dangerous as heck. This is how our people die. So we're buying more fatality hazards for the sake of profit. So you can see diametrically opposed are our safety value and our profitability value, diametrically opposed. Okay. So that kind of stuff, and again, waste, looking for waste, all of those things, those are all signs of health issues operationally, which then come from health issues organizationally. Did I give you enough examples?
No, that's great, because I do think, again, people get into problem solving, being the go-to person to solve
Yeah.
problems and come up with solutions, and really that's an indicator that there's some unhealthy operational processes, and you're just creating risk and unsafe work
You're
environment.
creating risk while you're fixing risk, right? And it just perpetuates, it just keeps going. And I'll tell people all the time, even in root cause analysis or whatever, you fix this, right? What did you, did you take enough time learning about the process? Did you take enough time learning about this? Because I think what you fixed, maybe you didn't fix what's creating the problem, right? You fixed the symptom. So, yeah.
Probably goes along with just looking at the lagging indicators as well, right? Like we have a big
We're
issue.
right on. The lagging indicators are reactive indicators, right? So every result, we'll call them results, right? 90% of business metrics are results metrics. I mean, here we are in the safety profession thinking we're going to sell leading indicators to people who are quite comfortable with lagging indicators for everything else. Okay. It's a tough sell. And so you have to walk your way up. But yeah, I mean, if you're waiting to see the output of something to know if you were successful or you failed, it's too late, especially for things like quality or safety or ethics or all of those things that are just like we can't afford to have those things fail. So you have to be upstream.
Yeah, so how can we redesign management systems to better integrate safety without adding that layer of bureaucracy? I think that's
Bureaucracy.
that stereotype, you mentioned earlier about getting called out in the elevator with the other execs. Like how do safety people help trim down bureaucracy instead of
Yeah.
adding to it?
Well, look, I've been in the management system world since 1995 when we started. We had a consent decree at United Technologies, and one of the DOJ criteria was that we should have a management system, and that was before any management system standard was in play. EH&S, none, right? So we basically created one of the first EH&S management systems. So I've been in management systems for a long time, and there was a time that I thought management systems were everything. I mean, it was it. If you just had a really good management system, you're great. It's not the case. So there's this balance point between having a healthy decision-making culture and having a healthy protective predictive mechanism, which is the management system. You can have a totally dysfunctional culture that blows through the best management system on the planet. Just blow right through it because it will overwhelm it. Overwhelm it. I think part of the challenge with management systems in organizations is there are not a lot of process and systems thinkers, right? So to be able to understand the value of management system, you have to be at least a process thinker. And a management system is a strategic process, right? So it's a process, right? So if you don't understand the way processes work, you're probably not going to appreciate the way management systems work. And so when you go into an organization, what you find is this little club of people that understand management systems. You got one quality guy and one safety person, right? And they each have the responsibility for this management. And no, I mean, we all have to understand how this works and then understand our role in the perpetuation of the health of that system. And I think that's a failure mode in a lot of organizations. The other one is, I think, just thinking that because you're certified, your system's healthy. Most of the certified systems I see out there are not healthy enough to do what I'm talking about. They're not predictive enough. They're not interrelated into decision making enough. They're not able to balance that imbalance far enough upstream. We don't want to chase risk at a plant. We don't want to chase risk because the time's ticking, inches or seconds. It's ticking on that thing, that risk harming people. And risk in a plant does this, right? It's not static. You know, you go over there and do your JHA or HIRA and you walk out there tomorrow. It's different because especially if there's a person involved, there's a dynamic there. Now, what you want, risk is going to move, but you want it to do this, not that. Okay. Um, and so that's what you've got to be able to control. And to do that, you have to have process thinking people. And look, I don't think that the future of management systems is functional management systems, like safety management system, quality, energy, environmental. I think it's a business management system or operational management system. I actually wrote an article on that, which is basically a BMS, business management system, which now integrates all of these system thought processes together. So when we look at risk, we're balancing out these things in risk looking, not doing a whole bunch of separate risk looks and then sorting that risk out on the shop floor or somewhere else. No, we need to do that up front, right? And we already need to know how to prioritize or sequence these things as part of the system, not as part of the output. So I think, one, educate people in process thinking and system thinking will then facilitate the sense of a management system, how a management system works and how it will get us out of being reactive. That's the goal. We need to have this be able to be predictive and get us out of reactive. And then how do we make it a business-focused, value-focused initiative rather than just a safety or quality or environmental-focused initiative? I think that's the way to go. That takes some time. That takes some effort. I mean, who in your company is going to teach people systems thinking, process thinking, right? I mean, maybe they're process improvement people, maybe safety people. I don't know, but I'm not talking about safety systems. I'm talking about management systems, processes, right? That kind of thinking. I believe that process health is the universal language, should be the universal language in a business. When I walk up to a process, I'm seeing safety, somebody else is seeing quality, somebody else is seeing profit. We all need to see process health. Because when we see process health, we speak the same language. Safety people don't speak the same language as quality or environmental or all these other, right? We just find common language, and common language is process health. And that's where we need to, center our kind of agreement on how to look at things and whether something is healthy or unhealthy.
So this next one is definitely probably the question that we hear the most from our audience. You touched on you're speaking to those small, medium-sized organizations, not necessarily the Fortune 100 folks. So, what advice would you give safety leaders who recognize operational or organizational issues but lack that executive buy-in that they so desperately need, to move things forward?
Well, I think savvy folks tend to have a sense that there are organizational, operational issues. Sometimes they have a hard time contextualizing them. And that's where my relationship comes into play. It's like, okay, where does this fit? What's the implication of this? And how do I tie the risk or the process issue with this issue? And then how do I tie it across functions so that I can create a bunch of people talking the same thing the same way, right? So I think go back to your question, what advice would you give to somebody that has kind of the feeling for this, but just lacks the buy-in? Well, I guess the question I would ask is, what does that look like? What does the lack of buy-in look like? Help me understand what you mean when you say that. Is it they don't invite you to the management meetings? They don't treat you like your peers? They just see you in a safety box. What is that? Right? What is that? And sometimes that's the organization, and sometimes it's you. Now you got to sort that out. And we're going to talk more about that in one of these other sessions, but you got to dig into that. Where is this coming from? Right? You can't fix a problem until you really understand what's causing the problem, right? Right? So what's causing the problem? You got to do a little diagnostic. And sometimes what I used to do when I didn't feel like I was getting traction, and I'd go find, that quality or safety, or I'm not safety, a financial person or somebody that I saw in the meetings was getting the respect they deserve, create a relationship with them, and then have them critique you and say, okay, when I open my mouth, how are people hearing me? Okay, that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, if they're hearing you as the safety person, well, you can see why you're not, because you're not talking safety and they're not hearing, this other stuff of value coming out of your mouth. So why? Understand why. Dissect that. Get in that. Is it you're not respected beyond safety? You're respected for safety. Are you respected for safety? When there's a problem? Before there's a problem? Right? So you really, this is the diagnostic I do. I just dig into where is this coming from, right? You're not equal to your peers. Well, what does that look like? You don't have the same office space. You don't get invited to the same meetings. Um, you feel like you're getting talked down to. You're only called when there's a problem. Well, what is it? What's going on, right? And then we got to figure out why, right? Yeah, not I've talked to a bunch of safety professionals, and I won't call them executives, but that kind of upper tier managers who will tell me they don't have time to go to these business meetings. And I said, you need to find time to go to business meetings because that's where the problem's starting, in that room. And
Right.
right? And if you need to keep your ears to the wall of what other people are talking about. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You were talking about building this new operation. Well, where is that? When is that? Well, that's where you're going to hear it versus waiting for it to hit the shop floor, right? So you need to be in every single management meeting you can possibly be in and be listening for the decision making going on and to see if they are thinking about safety as part of that decision. And if you have to be there for them to think about safety, then you need to help develop them, not just be there. You need to help develop them in their roles and responsibilities because they don't get their roles and responsibilities. You're the person that owns safety. They own safety. And everybody owns a piece of it. And if you have to be there to make safety happen, well, maybe that's the priming of the pump, but that should not be the pump. Right? So you need to figure out how to get yourself out of the mode of having to be everywhere because they're not going to invite you to everything. Some decisions are going to be made with you're not there. You need to make sure they know how to make a reasonably good safety balanced decision. And then, again, going back to those elements of understanding the business, understanding the profitability, the learning process health, all of those things will make you more legitimate in the conversation, just the vernacular, right? Knowing how to speak the language the right way. And one of the advantages that safety professionals have, I mean, my boss in Europe, we had everything from Germany to Vladivostok, Russia, which is 12 time zones, right? And he would never go to half of these countries. And I would go everywhere because I had to be everywhere. And he would say to me, what's going on? What's the business like here? What's the business like in Croatia? What's the business like here? What's the business like that? Because he knew I could see the dynamic of the business, not just the dynamic of safety. And I was his ears on the ground and eyes on the ground. And I was bringing him back something better than the data he was getting from those companies. I was bringing reality back, right? And safety people are really good at bringing reality back. So don't just bring safety reality back, right? So now we got to set people up to appreciate understanding what's behind the metrics that they get, not just the safety metrics, but the business metrics. Do you know how they're making that metric? Do you know? Let me just tell you, right? Oh, all right. So if you've got a good leader, they want to hear that stuff because they just don't have the lens and time to see that. And boy, you want to become a trusted person, you give them that kind of reality check when they want it. They'll be calling you in looking for that.
Right.
Yeah. In 2 years in my expat assignment, I went from being a necessary evil to being somebody they didn't want to see leave.
Yeah. Well, I think that's um, kind of as we get to the end of our first of three discussions, um, just that whole uh, transition or time period, and I know you can't provide an exact answer, but if someone's in a medium-sized organization, maybe you've got 200 to 500 employees
Mhm.
in two or three different locations, and you want to start this transition. You talked about being patient and it takes time. Like what kind of expectations should someone set for themselves? You mentioned like a
Yeah.
2-year time horizon.
I,
Like what would
I
be
see.
reasonable?
No, well, we're going to talk about this in more detail, but
Yes.
once you get some advocacy, right? You get some people that can advocate for you, and maybe that's just telling you the truth about yourself and what you need to be better at, right? And then they can help speak for you a little bit, right? They can help open the door for you a little bit, right? That's a really valuable piece. Then you need to set a plan for yourself and say, okay, I'm here, I need to get to here, and then give yourself little baby chunks of success. Okay, I need to get buy-in from this person, or I need to be able to speak legitimately about this, or I need my boss to appreciate when I talk about whatever it is. Okay, and develop a strategy, some tactics, and then when you achieve it, pat yourself on the back. Pat yourself on the back. You don't have to be looked at as the hero overnight, but keep yourself moving in that constructive growth direction and then get feedback from other people. Do I sound better? Do I look like people are listening to me? Those kinds of things. This is what you want to hear. You want to hear from other people their perceptions because a lot of this is about perception. You're building perception for yourself and the function.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice because my sense is if you work in a large organization, there's probably many people, on the safety team, risk management team. It's probably been ingrained in senior management as well. Not all the time,
Yeah.
but sometimes in those small, medium-sized businesses, right? The company itself is just trying to keep up, just trying to stay profitable, just trying to stay in business. And they're not thinking about this all the time, and there aren't multiple levels of advocacy within the organization. You might be the safety person who walks the shop floor and reports to senior
Sure.
management, and there aren't a lot of people, in there to advocate for safety. So taking those small measurable pieces, working on, one person or one department at a time, I think is really good advice.
Yeah, and you got to look at the dynamic in the organization around uh, these fiefdoms, right?
Yeah,
And what you don't want to do is you want to find a quality issue that's going to make the quality person look bad as you're talking upwards to your boss, right? So you want to go through the quality person, you want to get some buy-in, you want to have them maybe present here, you present it, and then now we get some relationship going here that I can add value to you, and then you could add value to yourself, and then through that, you know what I mean? Because you don't want to get crossed up.
right.
Getting
Yeah.
crossed up in some of these organizations is a death knell, right? Really. So you gotta look at the politic, you gotta look at the dynamic, and you gotta work your way into that. And you gotta size up the organization first and say, okay, where's the best place where I can get some traction? And maybe it's helping somebody else, not helping yourself. Help somebody else. Give a gift first, right? give the gift. It's like, hey, I found this for you. Is this, helpful? I'm out there looking at these things. If I help, is this helpful for me to give you this information or, that type of thing? Help somebody else, help another function.
Great. Well, I think this was a fantastic conversation. Can't wait to get to part two and part three. But until then, Pete, thanks so much
Thank
for
you.
joining and sharing your experience and your perspective, because I think it's really important, like we said at the start, that there's much more integration between safety and operations, and it isn't two distinct departments, right?
Yeah, and a lot of times it is. So we all have work to do, and the profession has work to do. But yeah, happy to help. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.